Hello again, whiskey friends. Thanks for joining everybody for another whiskey review. Today we are going to be doing something unique here. Was given samples of the entire vertical of Limestone Farms releases here. Now, this was provided to me by Limestone Farms for the purpose of this review. So, I'm going to spend the time here today talking a little bit about the front end of this vertical, which is the first four releases, and then going to spend a bit more time on my favorite of all the samples that I was provided, the private batch. Now, these are actually much different from each other when it comes from the mash bill part of things. I'll get into the details of that as we go through and what I learned during my research. So, thank you for joining today, whiskey friends. Let's kick off the show. All right. Gonna pour the last of the sample of the private batch in a nice stemware glass here. Gonna let that one sit out. Gosh, I'm excited to get back into that one. And we'll talk about why in just a moment. So for these, as we work our way through these, first off, if you go back to a live stream from August 2024, you can actually see our live reactions to a lot of these. We were provided samples by our executive producer, Todd, to go through this vertical. Limestone Farms was a sponsor of Bourbon on the Banks. So when we interviewed Diane Strong, who is the executive director of Bourbon on the Banks, we got to walk through these as well and taste through the series a little bit. During that tasting, the private batch stood out. So I was excited to be able to sit down and explore that one a bit more. Though at the time of the live, I was not aware of why that one stuck out to me. Now seeing the mash bill makes a whole lot more sense. We'll get to that in a moment. So let's first concentrate on the beginning of the vertical. Now, these releases, if you've seen them on the shelves, are called the Bloodline Straight Bourbon, Bloodline Small Batch Bourbon, the Limestone Farm Small Batch, and the Limestone Farm Select Batch. Now, what happens on these as you work your way through that vertical is that the proof goes up, the number of barrels in the blends maybe goes down. You know, the difference between the straight bourbon and the small batch is really the number of barrels in the blend. And then the age statements kind of play around a little bit, getting more concentrated. Though for the most part, we are talking about age statements between 6 to 8 years. So they're all generally in the same range. The mash bill on these are 78% corn, 13% rye, 9% malted barley. Now, in my Googling, looking for a source to this mash bill, didn't hit on a lot, though the mash bill looks a lot like the mysterious tote whiskey that came out a few years ago that brands like Doc Swinson was releasing like 15-year-old casks of. So maybe we're just dealing with a younger version of that mash bill, and from what I can tell, it's still a unknown source. So not sure who they are sourcing these from. So one thing that did stick out to me, and it's always stuck out to me about this brand, is going to be the price. So the cheapest one in the series is $60. That is the Bloodline Straight Bourbon. And that one comes in at, let's see here, 96 proof. It then works its way up to the Bloodline Small Batch, which was $80, which was 98 proof. And then the Select, which is $100, is 111 proof. And then the Small Batch, which is $140, is 111 proof as well. So price is going to be the main knock I will have on these as we go through them. What I did do, though, was graded each of these independently of each other. And just to give you a sense of as you go up in price, you do go up in score. So the Bloodline Straight gave it a 74. The Bloodline Small Batch gave it a 76. The Select gave it an 80. And then the Small Batch gave it an 82. So as proof goes up and as price goes up, score went up as well, though relative to other things on the shelves, those price points to scores are still a little off, lost a little points on the value. But let's go through the profile first of the small batch. I also have the select batch here so I can talk about the differences. But for the most part, they do travel very similar lines. And the main difference between these is going to be the amount of barrels in the batches. So cheers, everybody. Let's do just a quick roundup on the front end of the vertical, and then we'll get into that unique private batch. So both of these are very similar on the nose. The more expensive one, the small batch, it is more concentrated on the nose. What sticks out to me quite a bit too is a very nice cherry note. Always a big fan of a cherry note as it comes through. This one comes through pretty pure. All right, let's get into the taste of this one. So on the small batch here, the main profile, as I said off the nose, that cherry note really emerges. It's a dark cherry, it's chocolate sauce. I'd almost equate the mid palate to like a Neapolitan ice cream. Now, it's a bit more pronounced on the small batch versus the select batch, but they really do travel very similar roads. Let me do a taste on the select batch here. Flavors on the small batch are a bit darker and more pronounced. On the finish of the small batch, tend to get a bit more of a darker cinnamon, whereas the finish on the select batch lightens up a little bit, even into a bit of like a honeydew. But primarily speaking, you are talking about a profile that leans dark cherry, chocolate, sweet. So that gives you a sense of the vertical when it comes to the front end here. Now, as you work your way up in proof, I, of course, prefer the proofier ones being a proof hound. So that gives you a sense of the front end of the vertical here. What I really want to concentrate the rest of the video on today is going to be the private batch. Now, this is the most expensive one of all the releases, clocking in at $190 on Limestone Farms website right now. I did give this one an 85 out of 100, just to show you what I do like about this one. It even lost some points on value, still achieved an 85. So that ranks it 21st out of 85 reviews I've done this year, just to set the stage a little bit. I am excited to get back through this one because the unique thing about this one is the mash bill. 70% corn, 10% honeyed wheat, 10% honeyed malted barley, and 10% distiller's malt. And I think that factor leads into a lot of what I talk about in my notes. So let's break this one down. Cheers, everybody. Gosh, nosing this one, it is not like nosing a whiskey. It is like nosing a beer. I used to be really big into beer. I gave it up somewhat for the calorie purposes once I learned that 300 calories existed in some of the triple IPAs I was drinking. But gave up beer, transitioned to whiskey. This noses like a beer to me. Like a dark lager. Fruit-wise, that stands out too. So it's these layers of dates, figs, and stone fruits, just kind of across the board there. Maple syrup, quite a bit of maple syrup there. Almost like vanilla extract as well. So you kind of have this range of dark notes from all that maltiness to these lighter notes too. Oh, I don't know if I said it off the top. Age statement on this is 8-year, and proof on this is, I think it's 115. It wiped away a little bit, but I think it's right around 115. There's also a lot of like herbs and spices going on in this glass, almost refreshing, like a lavender even. So maybe if you get into like kind of a potpourri a little bit, just a hint, but lots of herbs going on. and herbs in that realm versus like baking spices. And last thing that'll get off the nose, man, there's a bit of like fried dough there as well. That's quite the flavor range, right? Like it's really, really got some depth to it. All right, let's get to the taste. Enough talking. So up front, it's a bit more faint than I would have expected based on how concentrated it feels on the nose. But the dates and the maple syrup do come through initially. Um, Mouthfeel is oily and it is creamy, so that part of it's nice. When you get to mid palate, for the most part here, I mean, I keep going back to images of beers and lagers versus always that initial instinct of a whiskey. So the flavor profile is much different due to what's going on with the malt and what's going on with the honeyed wheat and the honeyed malt. Honey does come through, honey and maple syrup combined there. And then there's a bit of a vanilla and chocolate swirl. Almost like mixing those two flavors together at a Wendy's if you're going through the frosty machine. Let me go in for another sip. Oh, and then that fruit profile comes back strong. The dates, the figs are still there. Those stone fruits get even more pronounced back into a cherry, but there's a lot going on. Now, the transition to the finish is also particularly strong. It doesn't necessarily change in profile or flavors, but all the flavors that I just mentioned escalate and become even more concentrated. And I would say the lighter flavors maybe drift away a little bit, and it's mostly dark on the finish. All right, one more sip, see if I find anything else. No, I think that's it for the most part. Gosh, it finishes like a beer too. It tastes so much like a beer versus a whiskey. Really, really delicious stuff. Now, the price on this one, if I didn't mention it before, is 190. So that is the main knock I am going to have on this whiskey is the price, but I do love what is in the glass, and I think this would be an interesting one to even put into blinds and stuff. I think it would really throw people off. Unique mash bill, unique whiskey, unique experience. So keep that in mind if this is a release that interests you. If you've tried these, let me know in the comments what you think of any of the bottles in the vertical, and I'll catch you on the next whiskey review. Goodbye, everybody.